Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us on this Tuesday, May the 5th. Today is a combined workshop and a special voting meeting of the Prescott City Council. We're honored again today to have Pastor Ron Merrill from the Hatch Church to give us the invocation, and Councilman Lazelle will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your love for us and opportunity to gather today. We're mindful of the New York police officer that lost his life recently, and we lift his family up to you and friends up to you now, as well as those affected by all the goings-on in Baltimore and across the world in Nepal. God, it's just a reminder of how fleeting life can be, and a reminder of what's really, really important in life. And so we just ask that you would provide for all of those needs in all of those places, and do the same as we have the opportunity to gather here and now. Keep us mindful of what really matters, God. Thank you so much for the leaders and the citizens that are here today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor. Roll call.
Mayor Kirkendall?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Cookneo? Here. Councilman Arnold will be here shortly. Councilman Blair?
Here.
Councilman Lazelle?
Here.
Councilman Lazelle? I'm sorry, Lamberson?
We don't even look alike. I'm here.
They're both here. Councilwoman Wilcox?
Here.
You have a quorum.
And Councilman Blair will be a few minutes late, as I understand it.
Arnold.
Or, I'm sorry.
They don't look alike either.
Yeah, we don't look like either.
Steve, you want to move over here? Anything for the order today, Mr. Manager?
I'd better not attempt it, Mayor.
Okay. Who are you sitting next to? That's, okay. Okay, let's go to the, we have 6 proclamations today, and we'll jump over Charlie's for a moment and go to Public Service Recognition Week. Chris Cucchio. Who is here to receive this? Okay, great. Good.
Since this recognition really is for those of the working members of our community in the city, in the county, in the state, in the federal government, if there are any folks here that fall into that category that would like to stand at this time so that they can be honored by this proclamation, or come up and join us here to be photographed. So welcome you to stand if you choose to do so, or join us.
Yeah, and there's a lot of folks listed on this, so even afterwards, feel free to come up and jump in on the picture. This is a proclamation for a Public Service Recognition Week in honor of the millions of public employees at federal, state, county, and city levels. Whereas Americans are served every single day by public servants at the federal, state, county, and city levels, these unsung heroes do the work that keeps our nation working, and whereas public employees take not only jobs but oaths, and whereas many public servants, including military personnel, police officers, firefighters, border patrol officers, embassy employees, healthcare professionals, and others risk their lives each day in service to the people of the United States and around the world. And whereas public servants include teachers, doctors, and scientists, trained conductors and astronauts, nurses and safety inspectors, laborers, computer technicians, and social workers, and countless other occupations. Day in and day out, they provide the diverse services demanded by the American people of their government with efficiency and integrity. And whereas without these public servants at every level, continually would be impossible in a republic that regularly changes its leaders and elected officials. Now therefore, I, Marlon Kirkendall, Mayor of the City of Prescott, Arizona, do hereby announce and proclaim to all citizens that May 3rd through the 9th, 2015 is Public Service Recognition Week, and encourage all citizens to recognize the accomplishments and contributions of government employees at all levels.
Thank you so much. Mayor, Council, once again, we thank you so much for issuing this proclamation. And certainly it's those people who are actively at work at this point in time that provide for all of the needs that are described in that proclamation. We are members of the National Association of Active and Retired Federal Employees, and that organization recognizes or includes people from all of the federal agencies, the Park Service, National Forest, Veterans Administration, Foreign Service, the plethora of federal organizations that those retirees and active members are part of our organization. But it is to the folks mentioned in this proclamation as well that we commend them for their contribution to providing us the quality of life that we experience every day. And we thank you so much.
Okay, moving along, next proclamation has to do with Hospital Week, and I see John Amos in the back, and John, thanks for being here.
All right. This is a proclamation declaring Hospital Week. Whereas National Hospital Week is May 10th through 16th, 2015, when individuals all across the country will be celebrating this time-honored event, and the official theme is Where Miracles Happen Every Day. And whereas a hospital is more than a place where people go to heal, it is a part of the community that fosters health and represents hope. They are central to a healthy and optimistic community, from providing treatment and comforting the sick to welcoming new life into the world. And whereas Yavapai Regional Medical Center operates 2 campuses located in Prescott and Prescott Valley, employs 1,723 individuals who cared for 10,238 inpatients, 66,814 emergency room patients, performed 6,799 mammograms, delivered 1,096 babies, and performed 166 open heart surgeries in 2014. And whereas YRMC ensures the access of primary and specialty care through YRMC Physician Care with 130 staff members, 5 nurse practitioners, 4 physician assistants, and 34 physicians. And whereas YRMC is one of the top 3 finalists for the National Research Corporation Innovative Best Practice Award, as an organization demonstrating best practices which result in significant improvements in patient-centered care and healthcare outcomes. And whereas the compassionate and hardworking people that compose our hospitals deserve universal regard and appreciation for keeping our community healthy. Now, therefore, I, Marlon D. Kirkendall, Mayor of Prescott, do hereby declare May 10th through May 16th, 2015, to be Hospital Week in Prescott, Arizona, and urge residents to express their appreciation for the people, facilities, and technologies that make trustworthy, reliable, high-quality health care possible in our community.
Thank you. And just for the record, I'm neither Steve Blair, Jim Lamerson, or Greg Lozelle. So. It's an honor and a privilege to be here representing the YRMC family, and as the proclamation stated, we have over 1,700 dedicated caregivers. We have close to 800 volunteers and over 230 physicians on our medical staff. And we truly believe it is a privilege to be your primary healthcare provider. And we also recognize the importance of partnerships. And we have great partnerships, and I see a lot of folks in the room that we work closely with. We appreciate the city's partnership and commitment, and I also appreciate the great work that all of you do for our communities. Together we are stronger, and thank you for the proclamation and the recognition and support.
John, thank you for being here. We just had a note that Charlie's going to be a little longer than we thought, so Chris will take care of the Prescott Highland Games week. So Jill, you and all your folks want to come down and join us?
Yeah, Charlie was down in Phoenix and he got his kilt stuck in an elevator, and you guys don't want to know what happened. So. This is a proclamation for Prescott Highlands Games Week, May 4th through the 10th, 2015. Whereas the officers and directors of the Prescott Area Celtic Society have elected to bring the 11th annual Prescott Highland Games to Watson Lake Park on May 9th and 10th, 2015. Whereas the residents of Scottish and Celtic descent have made substantial contributions to our community, the state of Arizona, and our country. And whereas the promotion of goodwill among all people of the Prescott area can be achieved by a broader understanding and education about the culture and contributions of all citizens. And whereas this Scottish Celtic Festival will display excellent examples of this culture, including Highland dance, Scottish heavy athletics, bagpipe and drum bands, Scottish clans, Scottish food, beverages, and merchandise. The Prescott Highland Games will bring thousands of participants and guests intent on preserving and displaying their heritage for all the people of Prescott to enjoy. Therefore, Marlon Kirkendall, Mayor of the City of Prescott, on behalf of the City Council, does hereby proclaim May 4th through the 10th as Prescott Highlands Games Week.
Thank you, Mayor Kirkendall, as always, and all councilmen. You've been wonderful supporters of our event and for our 11th year. And I can't humbly say how much we like to thank the City of Prescott and you guys for helping us put this on, because without you, we wouldn't be able to do it. And also the people standing up here in their countless hours. This is a nonprofit, and these people dedicate countless hours to be able to help put this on. And we've been lucky enough to be able to grow it year after year, and this year is going to be one of the biggest ones that we've had. And we know we wouldn't be able to do it without you guys here, and we really, really do appreciate you guys.
What's the highlights of what's going to happen?
Well, we're going to have, like I said, reading through this one, we've got our Scottish heavy athletics here. So when you see them tossing around capers, in English that's telephone poles to most people, but the capers, we've got more divisions this year, all the way from 20 all the way up to 50 plus, 60 plus years old. So we have a bunch there. We have Highland dancers, we have bagpipes, we have entertainment. We've got the most merchandise vendors we've ever had coming here this year. So we're just glad that we're able to do it, and we have a 2-day game, so it's on the weekend, and we just enjoy everybody to come out and share the experience with us.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thank you guys.
Okay, next, Mr. Lamberson will be proclaiming National Police Week. So, Chief, good to see you.
Thanks, Chief. I'm glad Pastor Ron commented on the police officer that died in New York the other day. I really want to thank all the policemen, all our firemen, our soldiers. These people put their lives on the line every day. They never know when they go to work if they're coming home. National Police Week proclamation, May 10 through 16, 2015. Whereas there are approximately 900,000 law enforcement officers in service communities across the United States, including the dedicated members of the Prescott Police Department. And whereas nearly 60,000 assaults against law enforcement officers are reported each year, resulting in approximately 16,000 injuries. And whereas since the first recorded death in 1791, over 20,000 law enforcement officers in the United States have made the ultimate sacrifice and been killed in the line of duty. And whereas the name of these dedicated public servants are engraved on the walls of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C., and whereas new names of fallen heroes are being added to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial this spring, including 273 officers killed in previous years, and whereas the service and sacrifice of all officers killed in the line of duty will be honored during the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund's 25th Annual Candlelight Vigil on the evening of May 13th, 2015. And whereas the Candlelight Vigil is part of National Police Week, which takes place this year on May 10 through 16, and whereas May 15 is designated as Police Officers Memorial Day in honor of the fallen officers and their families, and U.S. flags should be flown at half-staff. Now, therefore, Marlon Kirkendall, Mayor of the City of Prescott, and the City Council formally designate May 10 through 16, 2015 as Police Week in Prescott, Arizona, and publicly salute the service of law enforcement officers in our community and communities across the nation. In witness thereof, Marlon has set his hand in the seal of the City of Prescott has been affixed this 5th day of May 2015. Would you like to say something to the public you serve so well?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Councilman. And Mayor, members of the council, thank you so much for the acknowledgement of National Police Week. Interesting times nationally in policing right now. 113 officers of the Baltimore Police Department were injured in the recent riots there in Baltimore. The New York police officer that Councilman Lamerson just mentioned that lost his life just recently. We're very fortunate here in Prescott with the quality of life that we enjoy in this community, with the support that your police officers enjoy from all of you. It is so much appreciated. Your officers here understand professionalism and how to treat people as good as I've seen it. And I've got 36 years in the business. And one of ours is with us today, Lieutenant Amy Bonney. This is one of Prescott's finest. Amy, thank you for being here and for the work that you do each and every day in bringing public safety services to our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Jim. Next, Greg rode his motorcycle to work today. And who is here from the motorcycle society, group, organization? Come on down. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Leslie Beasy.
Good.
I commuted on a motorcycle for over 15 years, so.
It's a cush
Still
one.
here. This is a proclamation for Motorcycle Safety Awareness Month. Whereas motorcycle riding is a popular form of recreation and transportation for thousands of people across Arizona and our nation, and whereas the safe operation of a motorcycle requires the use of special skills developed through a combination of training and experience and the use of good judgment, thorough knowledge of traffic laws and licensing requirements, and whereas it is especially important that the residents of Arizona be aware of motorcycles on the streets and highways and recognize the importance of motorcycle safety. And whereas all highway users are being encouraged to safely share the roadway throughout Arizona, now, therefore, the Mayor and Council of the City of Prescott hereby designate May 2015 as Motorcycle Safety Awareness Month. Congratulations. And my somebody told me motorcycle riding is only as safe as you are, and because you got to ride for everybody else.
I just wanted to announce that on Sunday, May 17th at Granite Creek Park, your local chapter of the Bay of Arizona will be having a public meeting where you can get more information about our cause, safety, and awareness, some free giveaways, that type of thing.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
And moving along, Councilman Blair will proclaims May 17th through the 23rd as National Public Works Week.
Some say last is
I
best.
think I see Henry out
Come on up,
there.
Henry. We would have brought all our Public Works people in here, but they're out doing things for the public, I'm sure. Thank you, Henry. This is the proclamation, National Public Works Week, Community Begins Here. Whereas the theme of Community Begins Here, May 17th through the 23rd, 2015, marks the 55th observance since 1960 of an annual National Public Works Week. And whereas public works infrastructure, facilities, services are a vital importance to the sustainable community and the health, safety, and well-being of the people of the city of Prescott, the state of Arizona, and the United States. And whereas such facilities and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works staff representing the city of Prescott government, who are responsible for plan, design, build, operate, maintain the transportation in the city, water supply, water treatment, public buildings, structures and facilities, and who deliver solid waste services, transit fleet services, which are essential to serve our citizens in Prescott, Arizona. Whereas it is in the public's interest to gain knowledge of and to maintain an interest and understanding of the importance of public works and public works programs in their respective communities. And whereas investment in public work infrastructure protects the environment and supports commerce and is fundamental to meeting community needs essential to have an excellent quality of life for its citizens. Now therefore, the Mayor, City Council of the City of Prescott do hereby proclaim the week May 17th through May 23rd as National Public Works Week, calling upon all citizens, civic organizations with the issue to be involved in providing our public works and to recognize the contributions which public works officials make every day to our health, safety, and comfort and quality of life. And thereof, witness thereof, I hereto set my hand, Marlon Kirkendall, the great seal of the city of Prescott, be affixed this 5th day of May, 2015. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Public works is really the heartbeat of any city or community. Developing and maintaining our infrastructures, water, wastewater, roads, bridges, traffic, solid waste, environment, and everything else that nobody else wants to do. So we are here today to celebrate and acknowledge tens of thousands of men and women in Prescott and throughout the country to providing us the services on a daily basis and every night. And public works staff deal with challenges on a daily basis and resolve all these issues that generally people don't see. You know, they're behind the scene at night. When you wake up, everything's ready. So thank you very much for acknowledging and celebrating. With your permission, Mayor and Council, I would like to show a very short video.
You bet.
Thank you.
You go here. Thank you.
You ever wonder just who are these people? The Department of Public Works? And what exactly are they good for? What do they do, really? Well, it's Public Works that deals with the nation's infrastructure, all those things we take totally for granted. They maintain our streets, remove the snow and ice, provide water services, from safe drinking water to wastewater treatment to stormwater and flood control. Public Works departments construct and maintain public buildings, run utilities, maintain fleets of vehicles and equipment, even operate some airports. It's Public Works that maintains hundreds, even thousands of our traffic signals and streetlights. they take care of this, all the sewage. In America, it just disappears, never to be seen or smelled again. As does your garbage, recycling, refuse, junk, hand-me-downs nobody wants. It all just disappears. Well, it's Public Works who makes it disappear.
The prime directives of Public Works, I think, are threefold. The first is to maintain that which has been built and created for us by taxpayers of previous generations. I think the second is to create infrastructure that supports the needs of today, the economic development needs of today, and provides a foundation for our children to grow their economic needs and their quality of life upon as well. The third prime directive is to utilize technology, to advance technology in the way that we can provide our services. We can provide services that people had not even anticipated before. We can utilize our forces and our folks much more effectively, and it makes their work easier and makes them much more effective and efficient in the provision of those services.
Public Works is also involved in contemporary design. You're looking at the old Thompson Barn in Lenexa, Kansas, destined to be demolished, plowed under. Public Works took it over, totally remodeling it into this, a beautiful public building, even containing a conference center, which the city of Lenexa rents out, generating income. Here's something everyone shares, a smart bridge. Ice doesn't have a chance to form on this bridge because of its automatic de-icing system. Sensors in the bridge deck, or a code activated over a phone line, triggers nozzles that spray de-icer on the bridge to be spread by the tires of passing vehicles. All designed, built, and perfected by Public Works. When you really like a city or town, you might ask yourself, why? You'll find, more often than not, much of the reason will be its appearance, its amenities, its ambience, all things their Department of Public Works strives to take care of. Try taking a walk through town. Look around. Appreciate the myriad of behind-the-scenes work that is done that you don't have to deal with. That's Public Works at work.
APWA presents Public Works Saves the Day.
Some of us were out with Henry this morning. We walked the entire length of Park Avenue, but we didn't know you were filming it, Henry. Oh, there's still more? Yeah. Oh, I thought we were done.
Oh, my, what a beautiful bird. It's a beautiful day, isn't it, young man?
Yes, it is, ma'am. Yes, it is.
Hats off to you, Public Works professionals.
Is that all of it, Henry? Thank you. Okay, it's that time for the Chamber to bring us up to date on what's happening in their world. Neil, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Neil Sneller, and I'm the Membership Director for the Prescott Chamber. Everyone is welcome to join us next Wednesday, May 13th, for the Women in Business Luncheon at the Hacienda Inn. The event starts at 12 o'clock and will go till 1:30. It will feature a speaker from our area. You can register at prescott.org or call our office. Also, you can attend our next mixer coming up Thursday, May 21, hosted by National Bank of Arizona, and the event begins at 5. Our chamber continues to grow our membership. Here's a list of our new members: Buckaroos, Potties and Septics, Eve Conley with Windermere Real Estate, Footwork, Auto License and Title, Cools Salvage Metal Recycling, Carol Moore with HomeSmart, Northern Arizona Foundation for Catholic Education, Panera Bread, Prescott Downtown Antiques, The Hungry Monk, The Old Sage Bookstore, and Carol McKepp with West USA Realty. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Good luck.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, we're again honored to have Laura Sutton with us, and she's going to be telling us about the first annual Honor and Remember Memorial event recognizing Arizona's fallen heroes. Good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me, Mayor, Council. Augie Paulette Martone and as well as Jasmine Crowell are here with me to help show the flag. I believe you know what it looks like because you fly it. Thank you. We are here to talk today about 2 events that we have coming up. I believe everybody got a flyer regarding the events. We're going to be doing it in Prescott Valley. It's going to be a community-wide event. We're going to be doing it every year. This is an annual event. The first one is going to be the Memorial Day event at Prescott Valley City Center. In the center where we have the 9/11 flags, we're going to have 304 American flags, as well as the personalized Honor and Remember flags representing those fallen who are in this area. This flag that you're seeing right now on my left is a personalized handmade flag for Augie and Paulette's son, Justin, who was killed. What we're doing this for is to raise the funds for the families in Arizona of our fallen. Right now we've got 17 families on the waiting list for this flag. And so this is going to be a complete fundraiser to do that for these families who are waiting for the flag. This flag, the Honor and Remember flag, was created in 2008, and it's to represent our fallen military. The red is the blood shed for the sacrifice. The white is the purity. The blue star is somebody who's in active military. The gold star overlays that blue star when there's someone killed in action or as a result of service. The folded flag is something you're handed at the funeral of your loved one, which is never to be unfolded again. And the words, "We will always honor and remember your sacrifice by name." This flag is personalized. We have the generic ones, which is the one you guys fly here in Prescott. And this flag means the world to these families who have somebody who was killed or died as a result of service, including PTSD suicides. So what we're doing is we are having the first event. We're going to be going out on May 18th to place the flags. We need volunteers, so if you want to come out and help, the information's on the flyer. Just reach out. We're going to be starting the placing at 10 o'clock on the 18th. Those flags are going to stay up until the 26th. We will need volunteers again to help take those down. They are on loan from the city of Prescott Valley, the town of Prescott Valley, when we use them for the 9/11. We're just going to kind of commingle, using those flags for multiple events. So the actual event ceremony is going to be May 25th, Memorial Day at 2 p.m. We wanted to do it at 2 o'clock so we wouldn't conflict with any other events going on, especially at the VA. So we've got that event. That's the first one. And then we've got the first annual Honor and Remember 5K Run Walk, which is a complete fundraiser, as I said. It's going to be at Iron King Springs Trail. It's going to start at 10 o'clock. Registration begins at 9. And $20 for registration. It'll include a t-shirt if you can make it. You can also sleep in and just pay online and not come. That would be great. All that money is going to be going to the flags for the families that we have in Arizona. You can pre-register online at www.honorandremember.org/events and go ahead and get pre-registered. That would be fantastic. So I have a head count. Augie, Paulette, and Jasmine, and several other Gold Star families will be maintaining this event since I will be out of town. Does anybody have any questions?
Thanks for doing it.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be an annual event, so mark your calendars for every year.
Have all the states now accepted the flag?
We have 20 states, and I've got 3 more that are pushing through right now. One side has passed, and the second is in process, so we should have 23, and possibly some in the late session in October in a couple of states. So my goal this year was 25.
Yeah, and you've done that in 2 short years?
Yeah, it's been about 2.5, 3
just
years.
about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a lot of work, but it's good.
Okay, good luck.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to the action items.
Item 1A, adoption of amended ordinance number 4938-1476 to incorporate the final ballot measure wording, calling a special election to be held August 25, 2015, to vote on a transaction privilege tax dedicated to the payment of the city's unfunded obligations to the Arizona Public Safety Personnel Retirement Systems. Amended ordinance number 4938-1476, an ordinance of the Mayor and Council of the City of Prescott, Yavapai County, Arizona, placing on the August 25, 2015 election ballot the question of adopting a transaction privilege tax of 55/100%, the revenue from which shall be dedicated to the payment of the unfunded obligations of the city to the Arizona Public Safety Personnel Retirement Systems, taking effect on January 1, 2016, and continuing until the unfunded obligations of the city to the systems are paid in full, including any associated financing of said obligations, but ending not later than December 31st, 2035. And then, Mr. Mayor, there are 2 words that are transposed on page 2 of the ordinance that I wanted to point out. So it's page 2, section 2, the last line. Right now it reads, a no vote shall have the effect not of adopting, and it really should say a no vote shall have the effect of not adopting. So those not of were transposed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To play of words, right? Okay. Craig, do you want to?
Mayor and Council, I would just summarize by saying that, of course, at your meeting of April 28th, the Council did adopt this particular ordinance 4938-1476. Subsequently, we've looked at that ordinance, and to assure clarity with respect to the final ballot measure wording, and recognize as well the possibility that the legislature may in the future enable the issuance of pension obligation bonds, which are not authorized at the present time. There have been some minor revisions made to the ordinance, and so we are presenting to you today the amended ordinance for clarity and to, as I mentioned, enable the issuance of pension obligation bonds in the future should the particular ballot item pass, and if that is financially beneficial.
Council?
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion.
I just want to clarify what, in my mind, so I'll make sure that I think what you said is if in the future there's an opportunity that the states should see fit to develop legislation that might allow the municipalities to pay off the bonds in a different manner, that we might find capacity to save some interest, that this would allow us, give us that opportunity to do that. And the end result is when they're paid off, it's all over.
That's right.
Okay.
Mayor, I'll go. My only concern is that when we do something like this, maybe it'll take some of the heat off, but the fact of the matter is we need to take some of that heat off temporarily, or what Prescott looks like is going to dramatically change over the next couple years. I like that there's language in here that once that unfunded liability is paid off, the tax goes away. That takes away some of my concerns about the time frame there. We've talked this thing to death, so I won't repeat a lot of it, but this is something that we need to push forward to keep Prescott a nice place to live.
Right. Gene, did you have something? Okay.
I think I said
Charlie?
it last week.
Yep. Mayor, just the only comment again to reiterate that even with pension reform, it does not fix the problem that we have today. And so while I know that this city will continue to pursue pension reform, we realize this is something that needs to be accomplished now for our future.
Steve, anything?
Nothing. I think it's pretty clear.
Okay. Jim?
Well, similar to my fellow council members, remembering this wasn't my choice of the plan, but it is the plan, and I support a plan. A plan is better than no plan. So That's where I'm at.
Chair will accept a motion.
Mayor, I move to adopt the final version of ordinance number 4938-1476 as amended.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Let's vote, please.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you, council. Okay, item B.
Item 1B, adoption of ordinance number 4937-1475, calling a special election to be held August 25th, 2015, to vote on a transaction privilege tax of 0.08% dedicated to open space purposes, taking effect on January 1st, 2016, and ending on December 31st, 2035.
Mayor and Council, this particular draft ordinance in its various versions was tabled at the council meeting of April 28th to be resumed today at this particular meeting, May 5th, 2015. On April 28th, versions 1 and 2 were presented. Since then, 2 additional versions have been developed, and since it's a new day, there may very well be version 5 or 6 floating around out there. But in your packet, you do have 4 versions. A summary of each of those versions is provided in the council agenda memo. Primarily, it boils down to the purpose of the use of revenue for various wordings of acquisition, maintenance, and improvement of open space, including or not including lakes and watersheds, including or not including for conservation and recreation. So there are various combinations of those. And so what you have before you for your consideration today, should you wish to act, is ordinance 4937-1475 in different versions for your discussion and consideration.
Okay. Mr. Palladini, there was 2 items on the agenda that was tabled, version 1 and version 2. And now we have versions 3 and 4, or A and B and C and D. How do we dispose of the items that were what we tabled?
Well, I think the overall topic was continued to today's date, and in the interim, 2 other versions were drafted and submitted for council consideration, discussion, and a potential vote. So I think that you have had, because it's a continued item, you have had public discussion. You closed the public discussion. Now it's sort of up to the council to make it, discuss amongst itself. It's certainly the prerogative of the chair, of the mayor, to reopen the public discussion, but that's not necessarily required under your local rules. So it's really up to the council to decide amongst itself if there's a majority that favors one of the 4 versions.
Okay. Jane, since you made the motion to table these items, do you have anything you want to?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think we had thorough discussion last week on version 1 and 2. Might save us some time if we look at version 3 and 4 and hear from all the council members on that. I believe version 3 was proposed by staff. Is that correct, Mr. McConnell?
Yes.
Version 3 was proposed by staff, okay. And I proposed another version 4, which is on page 2 of the staff report. And in that version, the use of the 0.08% open space sales tax would be for acquisition of open space lands, conservation easements, so forth, as well as maintenance and improvement of that open space. And as a compromise, instead of requiring that an open space commission be established, that we take the existing Parks and Recreation Board and revise the resolution that created that board so that it's now renamed Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Board, and redefine its scope to include evaluation of open space and monitoring, giving advice to the council on what acquisitions to make, and the budget for maintenance and improvement on open space. And then the third element is putting a specific percentage allocation for maintenance and improvement, and obviously the rest would go for open space. That number, I'm open to discussion on that. I did talk with Joe Baines, and of course it's very difficult. No one has a crystal ball, so we don't know exactly how much to budget for maintenance and improvement, but we do know that some of that function now comes out of the general fund, so that if we allocate some percentage to maintenance and improvement, we'll be providing some relief from the general fund, which we all know is squeezed very tightly and will be squeezed more in the future. So I would like to discuss version 4 and hear from other council members about their thoughts on the elements of that version.
Yep. Chris.
Just had a question, Gene. Changing the Parks and Recreation Board to Parks and Recreation Open Space Board, would the makeup of the board still be the same with the members, or would you be adding more members to that board?
Well, in the ordinance, there is provision for adding 2 more members to the board, and at least 3 members of the board would be would have to have a demonstrated interest in open space, so that we have some balance. Right now we have a board that is mostly oriented toward active recreation, ball fields, tennis courts, and so forth.
Yeah. Just being the liaison to that board, it runs very, very well. Mm-hmm. And I would hate to have that changed because of people whose focus is strictly on open space. You know, I think maybe if you had a whole separate board to handle this fund would probably be a better route to go. I don't know how Parks and Rec feels about that. Maybe we could hear from Joe, but really it's 2 separate missions that would be combining into one board. If it stayed the same board with the same makeup, I'd be okay with it. I wanted to thank you too for putting these percentages in. I think the way it was written last time, it just left it open for controversy, and that wasn't good. So having the 20%, 80%, or whatever it turns out to be would just definitely have dedicated funds. So thank you for that.
Steve, before I go to you, could I take just a moment, and I think it'll tie into what's something you've been interested in from day one. Mark, could you put this on the board, please? This is generally a map of the open space that has been acquired since 2001, generally in the Granite Dales area, which was an area that there was a lot of concentration on. Reference A on the map was the first parcel, and that was 26 acres, 352,000 and change. B was the purchased in 2003. That was 33 acres, and that was $1,500,000. C was 27.31 acres, and that was only $190,000. D was 8.75 acres, a little over $500,000. E was Granite Gardens. That was 36.74 acres and $3 million and change. F was the 80 acres that Joe, the trail is completed now through that 80 acres. Am I correct? That was the James track.
That was the James track. That's the Constellation Trails.
Yeah, and that was bought primarily so a trail could help put a trail together.
Correct.
That's correct, and that was $4 million. But if you'll remember, the trust gave the city back to the Elks Theater project $1,250,000, somewhere in that range. Item G was 5.62 acres, $500,000. H, 6.919 acres, almost $400,000. Item I was 13 acres, $850,000. Just in those items alone was almost $11.5 million. And Steve, something that you've talked about since day one is all that money spent and no money to do any type of improvements, keep them up. And I was on several parcels over the weekend, the ones that I could identify. And some of them, it's very difficult to go out there and even identify them because there's nothing to identify. It's just parcels. The one that the county road goes through it, that where you enter the dells on the north end, I don't know, can we drive across that road yet? Or is it still a mud hole?
Well, it is. The creek runs through there. It's got a good bottom, and there is a trail system within there, but there's a little circuitous to get to it. There's no trailhead per se.
But the message that I want to bring forth is that I think it's critical if we buy land. Number one, I would like for it to be in the city limits, but we sometimes that's difficult. Is that we have the means to do something with it, then just take it off the tax rolls. But we've had $16 million in purchases. That's property been taken off the tax rolls. The county gets nothing, the school district gets nothing, the college gets nothing, and the other taxing entities of the county get nothing. And the public is really not getting anything either in most cases because it has not either been improved or we've never had the ability to do anything with it. So as we go forward and we look at this number, this 0.08, in today's world, that's about $1 million a year. If we have our 2% or 2.5% growth in the future in our revenue stream, in 20 years, you're going to have somewhere between $22 and $24 million to use for this, and it just needs to be, we make sure that it's used for the right reasons. And to me, that's not just to go out and buy dirt and take it off the tax rolls unless it's part of a plan. And there's a beneficial advantage for the citizens of Prescott to have gained something from that by people coming and spending money in Prescott and being a part of our overall plan. So, Council, that's my concern on whatever we do here, is that it be meaningful if we go to the public and ask their permission to spend their money to acquire more space, open space, is that we have a plan. And to me, a very major part of that plan is the amount of money that can be used to either improve or maintain the property for some purpose that we buy. Joe, I will come into you. I'm going to wrap up 6 years here in the near future. And we've done more in the last 2 years to make people aware of the trail systems and the things that we have going. The green up there generally was property that came as a part of the lake's purchase. I think there was a few parcels that the city might have owned, but generally that was, the green came with the lakes. And because that is the property surrounding the lakes, to me it's extremely important that a part of the maintenance of our open space is that we maintain the area around the lakes. And I'm not saying we take the money to use to clean up the interior of the lakes, that we have a problem with the other agencies, but the area around the shorelines I think is important. So whatever the language is, that would include the ability for the money to be used also to keep the area around the water for some purpose. It's important. So that's kind of where I'm at. Steve?
Thank you, Mayor. I think the first thing I need to identify, at least as far as I'm concerned, my understanding and as well as the public's, do we have a definition based upon any of these versions what open space means? Does that mean the trails? Does that mean raw pieces of land? What exactly does that mean?
Well, as identified in the 2009 Open Space Master Plan, in a broad term, it means natural parklands that will facilitate passive recreation. Passive recreation is not clearly identified, but I think it's generally accepted to be bird watching, hiking, biking, those types of activities, not athletic events and things like that. So it's kind of a broad definition in there, but that's as close as I can get you.
The reason why I bring that up, as you know, I've struggled for the past, 15 years since Sam Steiger wanted to move forward with this open space initiative in the first place. Without there being a degree of maintenance, you can see all the parcels that we own that have been without maintenance or have been taken out of the general fund, which we're struggling mightily with. But the problem that I have is that when we start taking pieces of property out from the public and we bring them in and call them open space, we're then charged with making sure those properties are fire-wise. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that comes with a cost?
It comes, Councilman Blair, it does. The way we've handled it in the past and will continue moving forward is the city applies for grants and we have a big map of all the city parklands, if you will, or the city properties, and on a cycle they rotate through those and do the brush mitigation, the fire-wise, depending upon what type of vegetation you're in. The recommendation in the juniper scrub oak is, I think, every 5 to 7 years, and the ponderosa pine is a little bit less than that. But that's the way we've handled it in the past. Has not been a direct cost to the city, but has been funded through grants.
Then I guess let me put it this way: we have a recreation trails facilitator, coordinator, Chris Hosking. From my standpoint, his salary should come out of this. Half of what he does is design, build, and maintenance of those trails. And I would suspect, based upon what takes place around the lakes, takes place around the zoo, takes place around any of those areas, it's passive recreation, whether you're watching birds from the overlook at Watson Lake or whether you're in Watson Lake Park. Those things are passive recreation by your own comments. Would that be correct?
Correct. Councilman Blair, just to maybe shed a little more light on that, I estimate that, again, it is funded out of the general fund through our general maintenance in the department, but with Chris and his salary and some of the seasonal help we have for garbage collection at the trailheads, things like that, operating supplies and whatnot, it's probably about $120,000 to the budget. That's not including lake staff and things like that. In addition to that, I want to point out that we do get $10,000 out of bed tax annually that goes towards open space maintenance. So that on the in the barest form is what that is, about $130,000. Again, that doesn't include lake staff that take care of the lakes and do all that stuff.
But also, you know, I suppose what my overarching heartburn is with number 4 is the percentage that Chris thinks is a good idea. I think it's a poor idea, because I think you handcuff the very people that are out there trying to make Prescott what it is. If it is only the open space we have today, it should be the very best that we have to offer to the people using that open space. To put a cap at 20% on it and continue to buy more open space, I think is absolutely the wrong thing to do. We've been doing that for 15 years. We have an overload of open space now that is poorly managed, in my opinion, or could be better managed in the future, as well as putting capital improvements on the open space that we own right now. That has to do with, you know, benches in the walkways and those types of amenities, trash cans, and all the trails that you all are building, and thank you for doing what you do. But I can see that there's an issue looming there to say only 20% of this would go to maintenance of all the open spaces that we own. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be cleaned up. And that open space is part of the tributaries and the creek beds, where we have trails in those creek beds that from time to time are messed with, whether it be transient or vagrants or whatever you want to call them, using those creek beds that need to be cleaned up. That's part of it. It's an overall ambiance to this community, and if we're going to continue to sell this community on e-recreation and on trails and bike races and everything else, we need to have a mechanism that is a little bit more flexible than putting a fixed percentage on it. So that's the problem I have with it.
Thank you, Mayor.
13 to 17% of Arizona is only privately held. The rest is public lands. Yavapai County, I believe, is 25% privately held. I've been saying this since the get-go. I do not support the purchase of open space with public monies. That said, I did promise, and I feel my duty to put it on the ballot to see if the citizenry of Prescott, if that's what they want. When you use public money to take it from public, when you use public money to go to buy private land, what the mayor said, it takes it off the tax rolls, it hurts our schools. I'm only willing to, myself, support version 1. I do not want to tie the hands of the future elected body here or the future citizenry of Prescott. I just won't do it. So version 1 is the most flexible, and that is the only one that I will support.
Charlie?
Mayor, thank you. And before Daniel gets hot out there, I got this at 11:58 today because it took some work. And to add to the numbers, Joe, or would you put this up, please? Version 5. So I haven't been sitting on this one all day, just got it a little while ago. Some main topics to discuss here. I share many of the concerns and support and questions that are out there with this council, and have spoken to a lot of folks in the community. The first item that you see here is the strikeout of the whereas related to the Recreation Board and then converting it to the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Board. I support having the the Parks and Recreation Board amended to add 2 additional members with an open space background. However, one of the key things, getting into the nuts and bolts of it, and Mr. Palladini, if you would like to expound upon this, one of the issues is that this was done by resolution, and so a voter initiative directing a council to amend a resolution is problematic. If you would.
Sure, Mayor and Council. In seeing the, I think, version 4 and version 5 language that purports to attempt to amend a prior resolution which which created the Parks and Recreation Board, I think there's a fundamental structural flaw with attempting to do that by way of an ordinance that is. The ordinance is intended to send an item to the voters to vote on. And so I don't think it's an appropriate place to amend an existing resolution with a new ordinance, particularly if the caption of the ordinance doesn't have any reference to it. So I think that if the council, this council or future councils would choose to amend the resolution that created the Parks and Recreation Board, this council or future council can do that. Obviously, those resolutions aren't binding on subsequent councils to that, but I don't think it's appropriate to have this kind of attempted revision of an existing resolution in an ordinance that's intended to send an item to the ballot.
So specifically along those lines, and having heard from folks in the community about this issue and what we've worked through, I think it would be prudent for us to find a mechanism to pursue that would clearly show the intent, the desire, and the action to add 2 people with open space backgrounds to this board in the event that this ballot measure would successfully pass from the voters. If we could then go to the next page, please. Again, you continue to see under the action items that portion is removed. But let's get into the nuts and bolts of it, and that's section 2, which has the ballot language. There's been discussion about percentages. There's concerns in the public about whether or not the city would fulfill its obligation under a ballot measure to expend dollars for acquisition. I've had a chance to review the list. I've looked at it. My comfort level is that we set a floor. We set an amount that we would, and future councils would be obligated to acquire, which is 50% of the revenue from the sales tax. It'd be 50% is what we are going to spend, so presumably $10 million. The balance, the additional 50%, and it's spelled out very clearly in here, not more than 50% of the revenue shall be used annually for the maintenance and improvements. That gives flexibility to future councils that if there's something above the floor that needs to be acquired, that the desire of that council is to acquire it, there's flexibility to do that. While at the same time, there's flexibility if we prioritize our existing open space to pursue those improvements and maintenance on it. This is a mix between version 1 and version 4. I honestly believe that if every single thing on the list was to come to fruition in some way, shape, or form, whether through a PAD, through acquisition, through conservation easements, if we as a city go beyond $10 million, I would actually be somewhat surprised during this period of time in acquisition. However, we don't have a crystal ball and we don't know what's going to happen in 12 years, 15 years. It gives the councils at the time the flexibility while ensuring to the voters that they know a portion of this tax will be spent on acquisition. And if at some point in time we determine that no more acquisitions necessary, then someone could bring forth a sunset proposal to take away the tax. But this is where my comfort level lies. It gets us to a place that gives a guarantee, but it also gives the city the ability, based upon the time, to make some decisions on open space.
I'd have to say I'm comfortable with that wording. I think that covers my concern, and that big concern is the obligation that we have as a community to take care of the maintenance of all this stuff that we're buying.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, and Steve, I'm kind of with you on that one. I agree with where Charlie's going, because I don't think this handcuffs us. It just gives us clear direction on where to go. Last time this came through, it was real unclear. We put roads and open space together. Could two things be more opposite? And then for the years that it was there, we just fought each other on what should be spent where, and there was no real clear direction. I do disagree still with the idea of adding on to the board. I think a separate board would be able to provide focus on open space if that was to occur. Maybe a subcommittee of the Parks Board. Maybe that would be the way to go. Right now it runs really good and it's kind of a separate issue itself. What is, if it was the 80-20 or 50-50, what are we talking about in terms of dollars with that? Well, right now, what would that tax bring in?
10-10.
Per year?
10-10 for the time of the tax.
So approximately $1 million a year based on the current tax revenue.
Okay, so we got $1 million a year. One thing I worry about is that too many ballot items are going to be hitting the voters this year, and I just think this PSPRS is critical for Prescott to take care of. I mean, that thing really needs to pass if we want to keep going the way we're going. Mayor, I share your concerns about all this property is outside of the city. Where's the other entities on this? Where's Yavapai County? Where's PV? Everybody else that touches this, is anyone else getting pressured to start buying tons of open space that are maybe outside their city limits? I mean, wouldn't it seem kind of obscene if PV was buying open space in Prescott or the county was buying inside it? It just seems backwards. It seems like other people should be in that as well. To what's been happening lately, I think Parks has been doing a great job, Joe and his crew. They're getting donations, they're getting right-of-ways, they're getting easements, they're getting grants. I mean, they're doing tons of stuff with a little bit of money, and they're making it happen. I think we talked a little bit earlier how it was growing. Maybe $1 million a year, if that was in his checkbook, maybe that allow him to continue on this path, because some of those easements do require money, and in order to get that mission done, if we want to indeed do it, it needs to be funded if we want it to continue. I worry about when the city has a bank account ready to spend on open space, and I look at the nothing against Mr. Worth, but the example of what happened there, and because we lived through that, where that land already was donated once. It was donated to a college. The college wanted money. They sold it off for $450,000 or about that, and now the city was going to buy it for $4 million. I mean, that was just a crazy kind of thing that we went through, and we saw that how as soon as the city wants some land, it increases the value of that land right away. I think his staff and his volunteers have made that trail system that we got right now, and they continue to do it. Can you count on them? No, but do they need equipment? You betcha. They need their excavator that they put out in front, and they got another piece of equipment that they were borrowing not too long ago to help make these trails. What I'd really like to see, and I talked with the head of parks or state parks, is if they were to go in and buy that big chunk of granite dells, I don't know how the council would feel when this comes about, but I think we should give them all the open space land that we acquired on both sides of it and let them turn it into a state park. I mean, that would generate tourism. It'd preserve the Granite Dells area for a long time to come, and I'd like to see us work on doing that. It'd be a great draw for Prescott too. So that's just a lot of stuff that was pulling through my head. I think this could be a good thing. $1 million would probably help with the maintenance and would do some acquisition, but it wouldn't have this giant sum of money that we all had to fight over on what should it be spent on roads, should it be spent on open space. So it needs to be exact. We need to dedicate the funds, and I might be able to support version number 4 if it doesn't include the Parks and Recreation Board being added with people that are strictly on open space.
For clarification, version 4 or 5?
I don't know at this point. So I think 5 would be good because you're changing around the percentages on 50-50. I mean, that would be all right.
And it eliminates the language because we can't effectively do that through this process, and would leave that decision yet to be made of how to comprise a group of people to advise this council, future councils on spending.
Gene?
Thank you, Mayor. It is true that property acquired for open space or natural parkland by the city would be taken off the tax rolls. But those properties do not generate very much tax. Not much of that land is developable. It's true. A lot of the really beautiful land is rock.
Then you wouldn't need to buy it.
And it's minimally assessed.
Well, are you saying we paid too much?
Well,
we paid $11 million.
Those were 2008 prices. But that is not the assessed value, and that's not what translates into tax revenue for schools and the community colleges.
Well, then we certainly need a board that understands values.
Right.
You know, we've all had the same letters, I think, and talking about needs and wants is really important. And in many cases, I think these were wants, and now we're going to be talking about needs. So, Chris, I disagree on a new separate board dedicated only to open space, because a large part of this money is going to be used for maintenance, and the present Parks and Rec group is as good as they come.
You betcha. When
it comes to that. So to throw them out just because we got a new funding source, I think would be a disservice. But maybe a conversation could be that there could be a new board or a sub-board that dealt only with acquisition. But we sure don't want to load a new board that talks about a maintenance program that we're well into and one that is working. So any more, Jean?
Yes, please.
Okay.
There are evaluation criteria that have been developed as part of the follow-up to the 2009 open space plan. And you were presented with a list of possible acquisitions in executive session. The reason that was discussed in executive session is that not all the property owners had been consulted, and that was about a year ago. And I can't bring that up at a public meeting, but I hope you will recall that there is such a list. There are evaluation criteria, and part of that evaluation looks at the value of the property to the entire open space program. What are the natural qualities? How does it fit in with the other lands? And that's the kind of thing that either a subcommittee of the Parks Board or a separate board would be using to then make a recommendation to this council, which of course has the final say on whether or not to acquire property. All this ordinance is doing is referring to the voters for them to decide. A 0.08% sales tax with certain descriptions, certain restrictions on it, it's not a foregone conclusion that any of those lands on the list will be purchased. They may not be available. The sellers, the property owners may not be willing to sell, and that's fine. But what we need to do is be prepared to pay them a fair market price at the point when they're willing to talk about a conservation easement or selling title to the property. And obviously, we can't take it without providing fair compensation. That would be unconstitutional. So the sales tax is a respect to the Constitution for private property. I'm very much in favor of including use of the sales tax for improvements, because one thing I think we need to do is improve access to these natural park lands for every member of the public, whether they're in a wheelchair or a walker or a mountain biker, competitive mountain biker. They all deserve to have access. And right now, we don't have any paved, even small portions of paved trails into the flat areas. We don't have very good parking areas in some of the trailheads. There are a lot of things that can be done to really improve the visitor experience and increase the accessibility. I think we've talked about the reason for the fixed percentage. We've been dealing 15 years with this controversy between how much do we spend for open space, how much do we spend for streets. Yeah. The reason I proposed a percentage is that it gives the assurance to the public that there is a clear boundary between open space acquisition and maintenance and improvement. And again, I'm open to whatever percentage you think is appropriate. 20% is probably minimal. And thank you, Charlie, for coming up with another suggestion.
Okay. Jim.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I reflect back on the Indian fire, the Dosey fire, the Yarnell Hill fire. I reflect back on some of the liability that this community avoided by not having so-called city property out in the middle of a hazard waiting to happen. We're wrestling with a mechanism in which to maintain good police and fire protection in this community. We're wrestling with the ability to pay off a liability that we've been mandated by the state to pay on retirement funds that went south. We need to take care of our roads. I don't support any of these things, guys. It's just the way it goes. I don't say I don't enjoy open space. We just don't have the money. It's that simple. We got to take care of what we got to take care of, and that's where I'm at.
Would $500,000 a year help with the prevention of wildfire through maintenance of these open space areas?
We've got those personnel on staff today. We need to keep them.
It would seem we're boiling down to, do we decide to take one of the versions to the public? Ultimately, that's where the decision would be made. And there's two ways to get it there. One is by way of the council, and the other is by the initiative of letting the people that are interested in doing this bring it to the ballot. So I think what we have to decide today is which mechanism we want to use. And I think taking it to the public is not an automatic endorsement.
I never insinuated it was. All I'm saying is that here's where I'm at.
Yeah, I understand, Jim. Yeah.
Take it to the public. You guys pick which way you want to go. I don't support any of this crap. I just don't.
Okay.
Not today.
So I'm assuming that's a no vote?
No, I didn't say that.
Oh.
You guys, whatever mechanism you guys want to take, I'm not supporting any of them. Okay. But I agree that it needs to go to the public. Good. And the public needs to know here's where I'm at. And I'm telling them right now, here's where I'm at. We got all kinds of liability out there that we have to take care of. This isn't one of them.
Mayor, just as a suggestion, that where I'm coming from is I appreciate Charlie bringing it up. And I think after all said and done, I think we can look at changing the Parks and Recreation Board to add to. I think that's a real good idea. But the bottom line is we do have a responsibility to take care of what we have. This is also asking the public, which I stated publicly, that if there was a good plan that go forth to the public, that I would support that if it met the degree of maintenance that I was after. That degree of maintenance helps keep this community fire-wise safe and preserves our general fund from spending money where we don't have a funding mechanism. That's what I'm about. And if there's parcels that need to be purchased for whatever reason into the future, it also gives that mechanism to happen too. So I'm willing to put number 5 on the ballot to let the people choose their poison and vote for it, yes or no.
Okay. Just to look at the map real briefly, you know, there's conversation from time to time that we could own all of Granite Dells. That's not the case. If you look at all of the platted lots inside of Granite Dells, open space, even if we bought every parcel that was available, there is still a lot of home sites out there, and that's all county. And it probably will remain the county for a long time because there's no way in the world the city could develop the infrastructure to support those residential lots. So I think it's a pipe dream to make people believe that just because we have money that we can own all of Granite Dells. Jim.
Thank you. If you're asking me which one of the 5 I'd prefer, I don't care which one you guys actually vote for, I would prefer number 1.
Okay. Let's go to the public for a moment here and see where we go. Yes.
Barbara Jacobson. I'm really frustrated with this process. It's been a long one. And I think I said a month or 2 ago, don't make us get signatures, we're tired. Vote for something. I think you all need to understand what open space is. It's not going to make you money except, as you said, Mayor, on Sunday morning of the bike race that was in town. This is about economic development. That is all this is about. Money will be made in other ways. And as I was the end of the little kids' bike race along the creek Sunday morning, some of the dads were going, wow, isn't this cool? We're riding along a creek. You know, when you hear those kind of comments, you realize the value. Now, granted, those were trails. And yes, some of our properties are also view, things that we can see. I was just up in Washington at Anacortes. Do you know most of that little island that the small town of Anacortes is on is forest that they're preserving and just keeping for open space? And there's a few little trails that run through it. And those people value the open space for the value that it gives to the community. You have to think bigger than how much money I'm going to make this week and how much extra work we might have to do to preserve this. This is about the quality of the community. Please think larger than yourself, and please let the voters have a vote in this.
Okay.
You must. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes.
I wanted to kind of say something to that effect of, you know, we got to remember that it is an economic driver, and we got to remember the dollar amount that's going to be raised by this tax, because if we want to see Parks and Rec, Joe's mission, and what he's doing with the Circle Trail and all those things, it's going to take some money. So at this rate, it might be something that's very doable that keeps us moving forward with our trails, with the not buying giant. I've never been for buying giant parcels of land, but I think the trail connectivity that he's doing is incredible in this town, and this could help fund some of that.
Okay.
Hello.
Daniel, how are you?
I'm good. I'm Daniel Mattson. I live over on Merritt Street. I'm going to have to say that number 1 is the way to go. And here's my argument for that. Number 1, it specifically states including lakes and watersheds, which is important. It does not tie our hands to altering the board. You can do that as a council anytime you want, but if the election wording says we're going to do this, then you're tied to it because the voters called for it, and you can't make any changes to what the voters said without a lot of time and effort. It's going to be a lot easier, a lot quicker for you to be able to fine-tune things if you don't tie your hands by having the voters say, we want you to do this with the board, we want to do that with the board. So let's, number 1, it's the least restrictive, which also gives you the most options. So if one year you find that Joe would like to do, he'd like to put bathrooms at many of these places instead of renting porta potties, he could put $700,000 into putting bathrooms in a lot of these. He could put the money where he or you feel is best. If you put something up there that says we're going to dedicate 50% to buying, acquiring property, then toward the end of the year, you're going to have all kinds of homeowners clamoring around saying, you have $500,000 you have to spend on acquisition. So I'm going to tell you that this property that secretly I would have been happy to give you for $300,000, I know you got $500 you got to spend. Why tie your hands? Number one, is the least restrictive and gives you the broadest opportunity to make creative decisions, creative choices. I think Joe and the Parks and Rec Board could make the most out of it if you go with number one. And like I say, number 5, you're tying your hands because it's hard to undo what the voters vote in. If they say you got to do 50%, what are you going to do if there's not $500,000 worth of good acquisitions that year? Your hands are tied. You're going to have to buy stuff that you really don't need. Whereas on the other hand, now is buying a license for a right-of-way, is that an acquisition according to number 5? Can Joe get license agreements? But that's not an acquisition, that's a license agreement. You're tying their hands if you say that we have to put 50% into acquisition. I think number 1 allows you, if you could put 100% to acquisition if that's what you so choose and had a great deal on. I recommend you go with number 1.
Daniel, very similarly, it's very close in intent to what, in my humbled opinion, as to what the original open space streets tax was to begin with, which I would have preferred to extend out to 2040, that gave council the liberty to prioritize through the process. And remember that we were able to prioritize, we were able to preserve the rodeo and 400 jobs, we were able to acquire the nature center, we were able to acquire the land around the lakes, which is very important. So number 1 is the one that I would support.
And now on the streets and open space, what they did is they said this is going to be for streets and open space, and they didn't specify what percentage goes to what. And that was a mistake because we saw what a mess that made and we saw the distrust that came from it. In this case, it all has to go toward open space essentially. Now that's maintenance, that's acquisition. If you want to do acquisition, we can use it for improving lakes and watersheds. We can use it for anything we want in version 1, and we get to decide after the fact, we want a board set up this way. If we don't like the way that board's working and we decide it should be a different way, we don't have to go back to the voters to change that. We can refine it with Joe and the council working together to come up with the best, most efficient solution. I think it's definitely number 1 is the one that makes sense.
And Daniel,
Charlie, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I have a question for first the city attorney. In the event, because these are dedicated funds, $1 million is raised in a year, and say there's no acquisition, or Parks and Rec comes forward and recommends $200,000 to be spent on maintenance. What happens to the balance of the funds from that given year?
Well, if you're looking at, for instance, version 5, because there is some more differences between 4 and 5 when there are percentage caps. What version 5 says is not more than 50% of the revenue from the tax to be used annually for maintenance. So in other words, there's a cap on annual, the use of the money annually at 50%. It doesn't obligate any expenditure in any year for acquisition. It simply limits the maintenance expenditures from that year's revenue at 50%. So if 30% is used for maintenance in any given year, the rest of it's simply banked. There's no obligation to spend any of it for acquisition in any given year. And also, with regard to the Section 2 language, like I said, my recommendation that be struck out because it's not really appropriate for this type of ordinance. So, and in the version 4 language, I would, if that's the direction of the council, I would also suggest that a similar change be made, because version 4 says not more than 20% of the revenue from the tax shall be used annually. I think that that's one of those rare instances where shall is actually permissive, rather than mandatory. Oftentimes, may is permissive, shall is mandatory, but in this case, shall really means may, so I would probably change that if that's the direction the council goes in on version 4.
The other question is the question about acquisition. I've been operating through this process of the understanding that acquisition could be title to real property, or it could also be an easement.
Well, acquisition is a very broad term. I think if you use the term purchase, it means one thing. Acquisition is very broad. It can mean the acquisition of an easement, an acquisition of a license, which is basically a permission, or an acquisition of fee title, or some combination thereof.
Anything further?
I'm good at the moment, thank you.
Steve, you had something?
No, there's people out here ready to talk. I'll defer to that.
You want to wait till?
Well, I think my question's been answered, and it's real clear. I think it's very important that these funds, if not spent, roll over into that same account and accumulate and don't vanish. And I think that's what I heard. So,
good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Dick Hollister. I'm just amazed. This open space thing, if it's so important, how about just getting donations, volunteers going for donations? Why does it always have to be tax money? We're soon going to be about one of the highest, if we're gaining on being one of the highest taxed states in the union. And, you know, when you raise taxes, it doesn't make a big difference if you're buying a shirt or a suit, but you buy a car, it makes a big difference. So you're talking between this and the other, which I understand you have to do for the retirement plan, you're talking about almost 1.5%. That's outrageous. At least consider that. What about just getting groups together and volunteering funds if open space is so important? Why does it always have to fall on the taxpayers? That's my big thing.
I think you're singing several songs that a lot of our people agree with. So.
And I just I feel like I pay enough taxes already, so that's all I have to say, and at least consider it. Thank you all.
Thanks for your time.
Sure.
Next.
Mayor, can I just add something real quick? The .08 was a significant reduction from what was initially proposed. And again, as was said, a vote to put this on the ballot is not necessarily an endorsement of the proposal or a vote in favor of it. It's asking the question of the voters whether or not this is a priority. That's where I'm at, is this a priority or not? And that's the question that is going forward to the ballot, maybe.
Excuse me, I was wrong on the amount, but it's still...
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon.
I'm Edna Modlor. At one time, I was a member of the early Open Space Committee and fairly active in it. I only represent myself now. I'm at 1866 Forest View in Forest Trails. I've lived here for 25 years. I'm still waiting for a transportation system, incidentally. I let Mr. Hollister go before me, and I'm now wondering why I did, because I guess I represent the very, very opposite view. I think open space, and I think some of this is putting the cart before the horse, because you still have to sell the public on this. And to my knowledge, there has never been, when I was first very active on the open space, I had good friends come to me and say, what is open space? What is open space? I think if we want this to pass and to convince the public of its importance, we have to do some better defining. Open space provides views. I know we view the national forest, but close-up views that make a neighborhood. Some green areas are preserved, little open green areas. Better air comes from that. Any of you have traveled in the Orient know the importance of open space and the lack of congestion of one house after another, even though it does pay taxes to have a house there. There are other things, and people do come for these reasons. The beautification of the city is important. Open space does avoid congestion. It gives us a few neighborhood paths, not just the big paths out in the forest that Parks and Recreation is making a wonderful job with. And I would think they would be a good entity to run the open space program. They'll know if they need more personnel and can hire someone on with the percentage that you allow to go toward maintenance. But I don't think we need a whole new department for that, and I don't think we need a superabundance of maintenance money devoted to it. I think the Parks and Recreation can decide, and whoever decides on which of the line of purchases you have in mind are taken on, how much money will be left. Anyway, I've had 5 years of college, and I hardly understood all this other administrative talk and how the bill will be presented, but I did want to tell you how important I think it is to define open space and make certain you know what it is you're going to present to the voters, because it'll fail otherwise. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, and I think you said some very important words to us.
Hi, I'm Sandra Smith, 701 White Spar. Mayor, Council, I got to go with proposition or version number 1 also, and I would like to see that money mostly dedicated to improving and maintaining and keeping fire safe and clean the lands we have now before we start buying more. Looks to me like there's a lot of space around this city and in the city already in city property hands for green space for people to go out and enjoy. If there's something that comes up that's really special and would really add to the city, go for it. But focus on holding what we've got and maintaining it and improving it before we get more. That's my say.
Thanks for your input. You've sure been quiet this afternoon.
I really don't like doing this. My name is J.D. Greenberg, and I'm from Prescott. And I have talked to several of you this week. And what I'd like to start up by saying is that with the initiative that was passed in 2000, there was a blunder. I don't know who made the blunder, but maintenance had been intended to be an integral part of that initiative. The fact that it was left off the ballot caused a major problem for 15 years for this community. But I'd also like to point out that during that 15 years, there was $16 million allocated. Now we're looking at 20 years, and we're now being the proposal of having less than the $16 million, which would have been with Jean's proposal or version. It would be roughly $20 million a year, and if she took 20% of that, then that would have been again $16 million. That leaves $4 million for maintenance and improvements. And I do agree that I think in some areas we have shortchanged some of the people who are unable to get out and hike the trails. I happen to be one of them. I fight this battle, but I'm not the one who can go out and rappel down the rocks or ride a bike across the dells. But I appreciate looking at it, sitting in it, as Jode pointed out, the passive enjoyment of our areas. One of the things in talking to several of you that came up was the point that the mayor, you had indicated to me yesterday that eventually the city limit boundaries are probably going to go right up to Chino Valley's boundaries and also to Prescott Valley's boundaries. So I think limiting it just to the current city limits is a mistake. We need to think globally in terms of where we're going. Wanted to point out that as we're doing more and more development, and again, you said yesterday to me that there'd be like 70,000 population eventually. We've got water issues, and I don't know if you've thought about it that much, but when we do have undeveloped open space, that is area that, number one, there will not be wells, individual wells drilled on, and several of you have mentioned to me that that's one of the biggest dangers to our water situation, is private wells that can be drilled on 2 acres of land. It also provides the potential for having water recharge areas in certain lands that are identified as being good for that purpose. I think your point about the fact that when we go in and we do fire mitigation on open space lands, it does protect the entire city. So it's a good fire prevention means. You already talked about the fact that on undeveloped land, the tax rate is much, much lower, so it's not that much of a loss to the community that we aren't getting taxes on it. I think it's more than balanced by the revenue that we obtain by having people come in and enjoy our open space areas. One of the things that was mentioned, and Chris, I think it would be wonderful if the state park system had enough money that they could come in and buy the dells. I'll just point out to you that down on the San Rafael Cattle Company, which was a conservation easement was placed on that by the Nature Conservancy, but they kept the big house down there, and it's been included in part of the state park system. They don't even have enough money to make it ADA accessible. So there's that beautiful house, a great area for tourism, and they can't even open it up. So I'm afraid that isn't something that we can look for. I think the whole discussion on whether we can modify the board name or not, if it takes a resolution, that's something that can be done either by this board later on or by subsequent boards. I do think, though, that it's really important that you include representatives from the group of us who have been, working on the open space issue for years. You have a lot of great experts in that field, and you have people with passion who would do a good job on that. However it will work, we certainly don't want to upset the Parks and Recreation Board if that's working well. I would just urge you to consider version number 4. Charlie, yesterday you said to me that some of the language could be tweaked here. You also said I was going to be really happy with your proposal, and with all due deference, I'm not. But I'm willing to say that yes, there needs to be a compromise, and I think 50% is too much. I don't think that the voters would feel that the distrust they've felt so far is going to be corrected by an amount like that. I'm willing to compromise and go a little bit closer as long as we get maybe in the middle, maybe 30%, maybe even 35%. But I think we need to have a specific amount. I think it needs to be understood that we can spend up to that percentage on maintenance and improvement, and that any year that it doesn't reach that balance, that it does go back, as Mr. Palladini has said, it goes back into the general account. I think we all can work together on this, and I think that if there are some years where there's a huge maintenance or improvement project and we may need to go over something, we can discuss it. But I think the bottom line is that this community 15 years ago acted in good faith and passed a measure because they believed in open space. They believed in, and open space has now become a nasty word. If we interpose natural space with it, or natural parklands, maybe that would be easier for people to understand. As I have mentioned to a couple of you, people don't come here to hike or to bike or to horseback ride or to use their ATVs because they would enjoy driving through developed areas. If we overdevelop, if we don't keep our view sheds, we're going to lose the momentum that we have been gaining in terms of getting the tourist dollars in here, which is really, really important. So I think I've covered just about everything on my little notes, plus all the time that you guys were very generous to give me in talking to you individually. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Jim?
Jim Lawrence, 345 High Chaparral Loop. Maybe this hopefully won't just confuse that, but I would like to read a little bit from a press release that kind of indicates that what we did in 2000, voting to tax ourselves so that we would have, was not only worked out very well, as the mayor pointed out, on the properties and so forth that we were able to do, but it set a good example. So let me just read from this press release dated 1/30/2015. And local nonprofit receives $4 million gift. ECOSA Institute, a local nonprofit educational organization, has received a $4 million gift designated for a 65-acre land purchase in the Granite Dells area. It also provided seed money for the design and construction of a state-of-the-art education center that reflects the ecological mission of the Institute. This is the property right across 89 from the Worth property that we've talked with you for quite a while and was working to try to include in our open space. The 65 acres was a development, high development, right in the west side of the Granite Dells. What in effect this $4 million and the donor of that said specifically that the money that he was giving was for open space. He was impressed from the standpoint that the city citizens did vote to tax themselves, recognizing what the open space did. What this property allows, first, we as the city owns a lot of open space. There's a question, as Steve mentioned, as to whether what we've been doing with that open space, we are not getting maybe as much as we could, but the trails and so forth that we've done, there's a good impression on that. And with this new open space on the other side, we have a very real opportunity now to be able to take the money, if you do vote on this, and be able to complete the dream that we've all talked over about, which is the lake-to-lake trail. The individual property that we are talking about that was purchased is pretty much a major portion of the land along the Willow Lake or Willow Creek on this, and would just about fill, except for a couple of small gaps, the whole level of going from the dam of Willow, the Willow Lake Dam, up to where the Willow Creek crosses 89. So this would be a very important leg of the lake-to-lake trail, and then the plans were to take it down the other side. We've already acquired a fair amount of portion on the Granite Creek side, so this brings into reality the very real possibility of having the lake-to-lake trail, which in effect is a pea vine trail, except it's going right through the heart of the Granite Dales on the left, on the west side, and then comes back down on the right side. So this is an opportunity done by a donor who was impressed in what we as a community were doing. Now, this particular property that is in the county, but it is all part of the Granite Dells. So I just wanted to bring that up and for your consideration, that it's not just ourselves, but as people outside the area that are looking at what we are doing, and they feel not only that they approve of that, but this gentleman included $4 million of his money to help us to save the granite, or to save the open space in the Granite Dells. And that is a real thing from my standpoint. Just a couple of thoughts. I was a member of the original Open Space Acquisition Committee. During its length of time, we came up, as was mentioned, with a very extensive plan for open space. That plan was presented to the City Council. It was and approved by the City Council. It has been followed through as much as possible by our Parks and Recreation. And I think we're doing a good job. It would certainly help if the money is included for the maintenance. That was one of the things that has been mentioned that we messed up on, but that has been taken care of in most of the different versions. With the work that has been done, I would suggest that there's no need for having a committee. We used to have the committee. We worked very hard. We came up with the plans. We evaluated almost all of the open space that was available at that time. And at this stage, a large portion of the work has been done from the evaluation. It needs to be updated, but it would not need to have a full committee as it was there. When Marlon first came on board, we tried to ask him, since it was the mayor's committee, to extend or to re-bring up the Open Space Acquisition Committee. And he declined to do it. He suggested that having a organization, and the one that we came up with was the Granite Dells Preservation Foundation. And Marlon was very good to help us in setting that up. And as being a foundation, we were able to work not only with the city, but also with the county and with the environmental and organizations. And so at this particular place, he was correct. So I would suggest that the idea of expanding the one committee would give you the input from the public, but would not need to have a full-fledged commission as was. I think that commission did its job, and now with a small amount of work, you can still have the take benefit of that committee. And the other thing that I would like to suggest is that The problem, as I see it, with version 1 is that it expands it too much, bringing in too many things that are not involved in it. An open space maintenance. This is something that can be taken care of easily by a committee with the work of especially working on from what it already has then. So I would suggest that some of the other versions are better, that it does not try to include the watersheds in this, but try to exclude it to strictly the open space and the around the lakes. Are there any questions?
Jim, thanks for your comments and thanks for your service.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
I'm Billy Orr, and Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I would like to give a thumbs up to Daniel. I think version 1 would be the one version that would be the most flexible. I think it's important that the committee, working with Joe, has the flexibility to say we need 75% to go to maintenance this year. Maybe we need 45%. So to limit one or the other by percentages, I just think it would really be best if those people that are making those decisions, making recommendations, have the flexibility, rather than being contained to do a certain percentage. I think version 1, Councilman Lozelle, I agree with you. I think that would be the best way to go. Thank you.
Okay, one more and then go ahead. Come on up.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Rod Moyer. I live in Forest Highlands on the southwest part of town. I am also on the board of the Community Forest Trust, which is a nonprofit that advocates for outdoor recreation opportunities, sustainable outdoor recreation opportunities. And that word does imply that we need maintenance money, of course, to keep things going. I was also on the committee that worked so hard at gathering signatures for the initiative petition. And I think I've got my ear pretty well tuned to what the public out there was saying to us. We ran into almost no one who would not sign that petition. And bear in mind that was for 3 times the amount of money that we're talking about in any of these versions here today. And they signed the petition because they wanted open space. They didn't want money spent on new restrooms, new picnic tables, maybe not even new trails. So I'm a trail advocate, and I think our Parks and Rec department has done a marvelous job with that. But open space to the public that I encountered meant acquisitions. So I cannot support version 1. I think the public that wants to see those acquisitions would feel that they've been burned again. And so I'm here to say that I support versions 4 or 5 or something in between if necessary, but not version 1 because they will be let down again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Howard, we're going to end with you and let this group make a decision.
I'll make it quick. I know Mr. Mayor Howard Mechanic. And I agree with the last speaker. Some people were talking about how number 1 gives you more flexibility. What it does is give you the flexibility not to spend $1 for acquisition, and then you're going to go to the public and say, we want to do something that's not going to require us to spend even $1 on acquisition of new properties. I think that's going to be dead on arrival. The public doesn't want to see another proposal where they're going to be taxed and not see some acquisitions. Mm-hmm. So I think that one's going to be dead on arrival. Yeah. It's a good way to kill the whole idea. And I would say 4 or 5, I think, as another speaker talked, I think an average between those two would be good. Right now we're spending I think according to what Joe said, about $150,000 a year on maintenance. I think that number should be increased. The question is, should it be increased to $500,000? That's a huge increase and would limit the acquisition of properties. I think if you double that number, that's a lot of money for maintenance. You're doubling what your existing program is. We need both maintenance and acquisition. The other issue I wanted to speak about very quickly was the issue about economics. And some people have talked about taking property off the tax rolls. There are other types of taxes that can be brought in, and that's from tourism. If you can get a property out here and put in 10 homes, or you can turn it into an open space, instead of getting the taxes that those 4 homes produced, how many tourists will you bring in? Will that bring in taxes that could even exceed the taxes that you could have gotten by developing that property? I think there's been a lot of research around the country to show that when you have natural open space areas, the properties nearby are more valuable. So those other properties will provide more taxes in property taxes. You'll also have people moving in who are more affluent, who will pay more taxes for various reasons. So I think we can't just say that we're going to be losing money by doing this in the tax rolls. There's been no studies to show that. I think net, we're going to be showing that Prescott has a quality of life that's going to appeal to people. And if we just do what some people talk about, we need just to stick to what's necessary and what we have to do for the city, and we can't do the wants. I think our city's better than that. I think our city wants to do things that are above what the minimum is for a city to do. We can be a great city. We can be a city that attracts tourism from all over the country. We need a vision to do that and not cut back and say we're just going to do the minimum possible to get by. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Art. We are a great city. We didn't lose that during the downturn. I'm going to speak a little bit from firsthand knowledge, and like I say, I'm finished up 5 years and working on the last. There is nothing more difficult than trying to develop a budget without any guidelines. We went into a downturn with a committed plan, long-term plan on street development and improvements. And this was the council ahead of me also, evidenced by Willow Creek Road and several others. We still have a long-term street improvement plan. And we did use the available money in the downturn to continue the progress forward with that street plan, which did not allow us, because of the downturn, to have as much money as was anticipated for open space. But without any guidelines other than a court decision that said a council had the discretion to use the money as they saw fit. That's the way it's worked. And I think it would be a terrible move forward to go into a plan where those options still existed. I think any future council needs some guidelines on both sides. If again you had rode with me this weekend and looked at the property that we've owned, you would agree that we have maintained nothing, absolutely nothing. I think number one just leaves us in that pitfall again of future councils trying to decide how much is going to be spent where. And if you want to have had some experience on pressure, I wish you'd been with me, because there's been lots of pressure on what we should be doing with that money. And like I say, this council, we've continued our road program. I hope we are successful to continue it moving forward, because tourists don't want to come to a street or to a town and ride on dirt roads either. So it takes more than trails and roads to make a community, and I think we've got a great community, and succeeding councils will have an opportunity to continue that process. I think number 5 give us some direction. I think it will eliminate arguments down the road, and councils and committees will be wise enough to use the money appropriately. But improvements and maintenance and acquisition, there's still a lot of judgment call there, but there will be adequate money on both sides to do some interesting things. So my vote, if version 5 makes it to the motion stage, that's where I believe that we should be going, because it sets the stage. We know where we're going, and there'll be no argument by different pressure groups on where the money is used. So, Charlie, I guess it's your turn again.
Mayor, with that, having heard all the conversation, I would move to adopt ordinance number 4937-1475, version 5.
Could we read number 5 again? Can we have that up on the screen at least to see it?
I'm sorry?
Could we see version 5 before we vote on it again?
It was so brand new that now you can see it. Yeah.
This was the first page with the strikeout.
I think the language there where it says no more than 50% of the funds can be used for improvements and so forth, that leaves a lot of discretion to committees and councils on if they don't want to use that much for maintenance and improvements, they don't have to. But it certainly leaves that option if there's an opportunity to do something spectacular in the way of things that we think increase our tourism value.
Mayor, just real quick, I would just say there's 5 versions on here. I'm happy with all of them because they all have maintenance in them.
Well, Mayor,
and that's important.
Before there's any further discussion, I think there's a motion on the table, but there hasn't been a second, I don't think.
No,
so
that's,
it needs to be a second before
discussion.
any further discussion.
Do we have a
second
second?
it.
I'm sorry.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor with a second to adopt version 5 that's on the board. I'm not looking behind me, but.
Yes, that's version 5 from Councilman Arnold.
And generally, it gives the option to the council and the committee to use up to 50% to maintain and improve what we have.
And, you know, not to confuse the matter or anything, but just to clarify, as the city attorney mentioned, the wording in the resolution is up to 50% annually for maintenance and improvements. That means whatever isn't spent. This does meet the requirements of governmental accounting standards and legally that it is a separate fund. The funds will accumulate. Once they are accumulated, they would only be used for acquisition.
Okay. Is that manageable by the finance department?
It would, and again, just to make it clear, it would prevent accumulation of funds over that 50% level to be used to improve a trailhead, because that is an annual limit. Once it hits the fund balance, it is only usable for acquisition as I am reading this. And I would defer to legal for
Counsel, you're scratching your head.
Well, I don't know if that's the intent. In other words, what Mr. Woodfield's saying is that under the proposed language of version 5, up to 50% of the money could be used annually, and if it's not, the balance then cannot be used for maintenance
or improvements.
Or improvements. In other words, it's that year's money generated can be used for maintenance or improvements, but if it's not up to 50%, then the balance rolls into an acquisition fund. I don't know if that's the intent of Councilman Arnold or not.
Charlie, did you understand that in the motion?
I didn't. You know, that's a very technical question. I'm just running it through my head to make sure I've got it clear, so bear with me for just a second.
It would not allow you then to save up for a big maintenance project,
or an improvement project like handicap accessible trails or trailhead. Or
the purpose behind the 50% was to set a limitation on an annual basis of how much could be spent towards maintenance and improvement. That being said, the question about a large-scale improvement project that would be potentially over multiple years, what have you, the intention should be that the flexibility is there to accrue that too. And the 50% is a limitation to ensure that the commitment of acquisition is being met.
Two separate funds.
Well, Steve, what are you thinking?
Well, as I read this again, and I'm going to go back and say version 1, gives the flexibility. This is all about maintenance. It's all about open space, and open space defined by Mr. Baines is also the lake edges for viewing, the watershed for hiking. Number 1 covers it all, and as I said, I like 5, but I also like 1 because I believe the flexibility opens a door for this council to have a piece of property that may come up in the future that we need to buy, and you can spend over 50%. There might be maintenance programs in the future for fire-wise that we may spend over 50%. And I think any sitting city council that's put on this diocese here has the right to listen to the Parks and Recreation Board making the evaluation to us, and this board making the decision. So I'm not wanting to strap people's hands, and I will support version 1.
And Mayor and Councilman Arnold, if I may, I think if the intent is not what Mr. Woodfield's talking about, then the language in version 5 should read with not more than 50% of the accumulated revenue from said tax to be used for maintenance. Yeah. So you would insert the word accumulated between the revenue and strike the word annually, and that would then allow you essentially up to 50% of any accumulated monies used for maintenance and improvements. Yeah. So I think that, what I understand from Councilman Arnold, is his intent not to be forced to spend the money in a given year, or sort of a use it or lose it type situation.
But it would guarantee 50% would be used for acquisition.
At least.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. So what you have described is a very good way of putting my intent. There's potentially $20 million that's being raised. There is a floor minimum that the city will pursue spending $10 million. Anything above and beyond that will be at the discretion of a council related to acquisition. So that would be the wording that you've discussed would be appropriate. And by the way, I don't support version 1. I think it's a mistake, so I'll be voting no if this one doesn't pass.
So just to clarify, there is a motion in a second. It sounds like Councilman Arnold wants to amend his motion to affect that change, and if the second agrees to that, that would be your motion and second on the...
Would you repeat specifically your proposed language change?
In the 2 paragraphs, it would say, go above, with not more than 50% of the accumulated revenue.
Yep.
From said tax to be used, and strike the word annually, so to be used for maintenance. Yep. Which is reflected in the yes vote shall have the effect language.
Okay. I would amend my motion to reflect those amendments.
And again, so we all understand that this guarantees that 50% of whatever is collected during this 20 years will be used for the acquisition of natural or open space, whatever we want to call it.
As long as the second accepts the amendment.
Okay. Jane, we'll need a second to the amended
I'll agree
motion.
to the
Can you do
the
that?
amendment,
Okay.
yeah.
Did you want something else?
Well, I just wanted to clarify that when I wrote the original language, my intention was that if 50% in any given year is not spent for maintenance and improvement, it just rolls over into the open space fund. And then the next year, you look at what the needs are for maintenance and improvement.
Well, and I think that's what this says, is that if there's no money spent the first year, it's all in this sort of segregated fund, I guess, for lack of a better term.
And at any given time, no more than 50% of whatever is accumulated in that fund can be spent for maintenance and improvements. However, if there is a 2 years of accumulation and it's $2 million and 1.9 of that is the then city council determines it's going to purchase a piece of property for 1.9 million, certainly has that ability. But it can't spend more than 1 million of that 2 million on maintenance and improvements of what is accumulated in that at that time.
Okay, but the rollover on the side that buys property would have the same effect.
No.
It would not disappear at the end of each year.
No. It stays in that segregated account, and at any given time, whatever is in that account, the accumulated revenue from that tax, no more than 50% of that accumulated revenue could be spent on maintenance and improvements. But certainly at any given time, 100% of that accumulated revenue could be spent on acquisition, or up to 100%, I should say. I mean, in other words, there's no limitation on the percentage of acquisition. There's simply a cap on the amount that can be spent on improvements and maintenance.
So
Is that?
I'm good.
We're good here.
Mayor, I just think we're having a hard time getting around this language. And you don't think the public's not going to have a hard time getting around this language? The bottom line is, in number 1, says you have a money for open space. And whatever money's not used for acquisition or for maintenance stays in that account for the following year. So, you know, our Parks and Recreation Director and the Advisory Board giving direction to the council of where the money needs to be spent at any given year is probably the appropriate way to go, and pretty clear for the public to understand it.
Well, we have had discussion for 5 years, many times, on where the money should have went, with no direction. And most of the time, the votes were sufficient to continue our road projects, and I hate to see us in that position again. At the moment, we have a motion and a second on the table. Let's vote on the latest version, which is number 5 at this point. We got too many.
I want all of them.
Dave, you want both? Okay.
Passes 4-3. Councilman Blair, Councilman Lamerson, and Councilman Nozell dissenting.
Okay. Motion carried. Okay, version number 5 will be the one that's put into proper form to go to the voters. Okay. Okay, let's continue the agenda. I think I lost my agenda.
Item 1C, fiscal year 16 and subsequent budgets, council decision, direction, and possible action.
And Mayor, on this item, I don't have my list for today. Been a little focused on legal language, so.
Okay.
Mayor, and Council, as you recall, this was a standing item for any council members to bring
Council
forward.
has, or the staff has nothing at this moment?
We do not, and certainly we have a meeting next week on the 12th where this item will reappear, followed by a budget workshop on the 14th.
Okay, and then the 14th, we need to plan for the whole morning at the very least. Okay.
Mayor, can I add something to that? Craig, when we start our budget discussions and the whole planning of the next year's budget, is a budget going to be presented to us with the expectation that there is no tax relief, sales tax relief?
We believe that we will arrive at a balanced budget. That's what we will present to you. However, to balance that budget, there are certain actions or assumptions or givens, depending on what terminology you like, that we will clearly outline to you. In other words, this budget has been balanced with certain things being done and those being listed. What that will do is we will be able to get through at least until January 1st of 2016. Depending upon what passes or doesn't pass, then if there are cuts to be made, for example, we would anticipate having dialogue with the council between August 25th of 2015 and December 31st of 2015 to outline what those cuts are going to be. If in fact, for example, the PSPRS unfunded liabilities measure fails, that will dramatically impact the general fund. There will be cuts that we will outline to you that will need to be effective on January 1st of 2016, followed by even more dramatic cuts for the following fiscal year, because as we learned in many sessions, the cost of supporting those unfunded liabilities and what we have to do to rectify that are extraordinary.
So if I understand it in shorter version, you're going to bring an assumption of a budget that presumes that we keep that tax that's in place till January, and then we, knowing if it didn't pass, we'd react after January.
Well, if I understand your question, maybe I didn't the first time, but we are not going to bring to you a budget which assumes that any of these measures are going to pass.
Okay. Personally, I think none of them are going to pass.
But which gives us an opportunity, as we've had every year, at the mid-year point, to take a look at where we are with income and expenses and make adjustments at that time. Okay. Water management items for discussion. Okay.
Item 2A, water management items for discussion.
We are not proposing any sales tax for the water fund.
Sorry. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Today's item pertaining to water service outside of city limits, request for a second meter, has been scheduled before the Council Water Issues Committee on 2 occasions, February 10th and March 31st of 2015. Requesting of a meter from the city involves multiple city departments applying the city codes. From the city's water resource management staff, it requires applying the codes, in this case 2-1-8, service outside of city limits, and the intergovernmental agreements or previously entered into valid contractual agreements that it references. Given the diminishing physical availability of alternative water to serve new development, including increasing lot splits, rezoning requests, it is anticipated that the Council Water Issues Committee will further address the topic of providing water outside of city limits, including updating of water management policy as necessary. Details on this situation are in your packet today. I'll summarize briefly some of the points. The McConaughey family owns parcel number 111-03-156J. They purchased both 156H and J in 2005. Prior to and post February 10th, 2015 Water Committee meeting, extensive research of the McConaughey request was completed with the result that there was no entitlement to a second meter. The determination was communicated to the McConaugheys at the Water Issues Committee meeting on March 31st of this year. This was followed by committee discussion of a possible code amendment, enabling consideration of the issue, a waiver, variance upon finding a hardship. Section 2-1-8, provision for water to areas outside of city limits, does not contain a waiver provision at this time. As mentioned above, due to diminishing alternative water availability and widely differing views of what constitutes a hardship upon the land, any such provision would be considered with an abundance of caution, or should be considered with abundance of caution. Each acre-foot supplied outside of the city, where most properties are not served by city sewer, is one less acre-foot of an increasingly scarce resource available to the properties within city limits or other contracts that we hold. Accordingly, the draft ordinance of Attachment B in your packet has been structured to include the requirement that there must be an existing occupied residential structure on the property as of January 1, 1999, the date that the Arizona Department of Water Resources declared the Prescott AMA to no longer be in a state of safe yield. And that triggered the full implementation of the Assured Water Supply Program. This would preclude waivers to new development while creating a means for addressing particular situations for which historical record is unclear or other complicated circumstances exist. Should the council have an interest in amending the city code to add a waiver provision, it would provide the means for addressing the McConaughey request. A draft of the proposed code, once again, is attachment B in your packet. So this concludes my summary. I'm happy to assist with information for your discussion and direction on this item.
Question? Jean.
I have a question. Leslie, maybe you know the answer to this. When did this policy start for the city to allow extension of sewer and water service without requiring annexation?
I don't think I know the answer to that. The city's had agreements that date back into probably the 50s and 60s. So the city was serving outside of city limits dating back to that time frame.
Okay. I think it's a very poor policy, and it gets us into all kinds of problems with county islands that are unsewered, have water, county islands that have sewer, but people can't vote in city elections even though they're right next to the city and receive city services. All three things need to go together: sewer, water, annexation.
Gene, I don't have the exact answer, but I can tell you that in the 70s that the council established a policy that we would not provide services outside the city. But subsequent to that, I think there's been many changes, and probably for lots of reasons. But I agree with you, and even more so, that with our water situation the way it is, that we would provide water outside the city and not have the benefit of the effluent to put back into our system. I think that's even a worse way to do it, but apparently that's where we're at. So,
just to clarify for everyone at home and here, this land does not, we don't get the sewer off this land, just we're giving them the water, but nothing's coming off, correct?
Correct.
And again, to restate, this is in the county, this is not in the city limits.
In the city.
Okay.
But it held a water service agreement at one
Sure.
time, and all entitlements have been met.
I agree with Gene. I think we should just, it needs to be looked at, but I don't think we should change anything that we're not doing already.
in reading the discussion that the Water Committee had, apparently there was 75 exceptions at the time that this last policy was created.
Yeah, well, it gets a little tricky just to keep it straight. It's agreement number 75, and within agreement number 75, it allowed for 75 connections. And those connections have been made.
And those are all outside the city limits.
Correct.
And all of those over a period of time under similar circumstances could come back and ask for consideration for the city to make a change.
Well, I think we'd be in the same position we are now, and as I've done in the past with other properties that are in the area, we reviewed the agreements, and if we can't provide, if all connections have been met, then I have to say we can't provide another service.
Okay. Charlie?
Mayor, a lot of this is derived from almost 2 years of staff research and back and forth and 2 water issue committee meetings and a lot of discussions with the property owner and visits to the property to understand the issue. The city made a bad choice a long time ago to extend water lines outside the city. If we were to fully effectuate our code and enforce it, we would likely create a situation where we would have an exempt well drilled on one of these 2 properties. It'd be the outcome. I have long been of the opinion that I don't think we need to make sweeping changes to fix a situation that is relatively unique and is specific to the language in here. This is a particular situation in which the historical record is unclear and there are other complicated circumstances. This house, this property, was at one time kind of in compliance, then the decision to do a combination of a lot, then resplit for the purposes of moving a lot line, created a situation where it happened after the effective date of an ordinance that changed the city code. And what we've got is 2 properties being served by 1 meter. It's a situation where you probably now have a title encumbrance. At one point in time, there were 2 parties to the water meter billing from the city. So we recognize that there were 2 different parties. This is a unique situation, and I agree, I don't think a sweeping code change is in the city's best interest, to the mayor's question. I do think, however, you've got a very historic property that the city currently serves water to that has got an issue, and you've got a property owner asking their water service provider for assistance in addressing. If we were to consider an amendment to the code, I would seek to have the occupied residential structure date be pushed back to the 70s, is when it would have had to have been constructed, to limit the ability for others to come forward and claim a hardship. In this situation, if you visit the site, you understand the history. It would have been my desire to have seen this done administratively, but instead we've now spent 2 years of time trying to address something that's, in my mind, a relatively simple situation. It's now become this big snowball that has been pushed off the mountain. So I would like to see the discussion continue and us find a method to address this, because to Leslie's point, there are properties that are currently served that could potentially split, and all of a sudden we have a subdivision that we have to service. We need to be very careful in this situation, but I do believe that it's through a comedy of errors and a lot of other extenuating circumstances that we have a property owner who is a customer of ours that we need to try and address their issue for them.
This property is now served by a septic tank?
Yes, and it's at the very top of Thumb Butte, so the concept of running a sewer line to it and or annexing it is unrealistic. There's no potential that we would be able to annex. It would take thousands of property owners to do it, and to run a sewer line would be to go all the way up to literally the boundary with the Forest Service.
Okay. Anyone else?
Well, I'll comment on it because I was at the meeting with Charlie, the last meeting with Charlie. You know, this is a self-imposed hardship. You know, at some point, we had a water service agreement with 1 property. Somebody somewhere along the line, whether it's the current owners or the current occupants, etc., decided to take advantage of that water service agreement, built another residence someplace, hooked into it off of 1 meter. And now it's come to the attention of the city that you're serving 2 properties. I also agree with Charlie that they are a customer of the city, and this has been going on for several years. It's not like we just found out about it last week. So you've got an issue. And I agree that we need to figure out what are we going to do about case by case, something that comes up before the council from time to time, because it happens that the people that live adjacent to the county or adjacent to the city in the county are not the enemy. A lot of these people work in the city. A lot of people spend their money in the city. They're people that have been dependent on the city, and we've got to come up with a solution. So I don't know what the solution is, but it's kind of aggravating to have to deal with it, because somewhere along the way, somebody knew they were tapping into a meter that shouldn't have been tapped into to begin with.
Okay. And if I may, Mayor, just 2 follow-up comments. Jim, you're absolutely right. Somebody did this at some point in time, and it appears to have been some time ago that it was done. The other aspect of it is that ultimately, I think it should be our job to try and find resolution to things in lieu of it turning into litigation. So I would like to continue down the path to find a resolution to address this issue for a customer of the city.
Okay. Well, apparently the Water Issues Committee is the appropriate place to make a recommendation to the rest of the council. So why don't y'all have 1 more meeting, and we've discussed it enough, and bring it back, okay?
Okay. Yes.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Open for public comment?
It's a discussion item, Howard, it's not. But it will be when we bring it back to the council for a resolution. Thank you. Let's go to the 3rd public reading for the CBGG.
And Mayor, I'm sorry, I'm going to need to step away for a few minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the third public hearing for our Community Development Block Grant Program's Consolidated Plan. It's a 5-year plan that sort of guides, in general, the activities of the CDBG program's annual plans, which you'll be seeing next week. As part of this presentation today, we would ask you to open the public hearing, allow our consultant, Martina Keel, to make a very brief presentation to you, and take any public comment that may occur during that time period, and then close the public hearing, and we will be back before you next week with the final action associated with this, along with integration of any comments that we received today or between now and the time we complete the staff presentation for next week. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Martina and ask her to give you a brief presentation.
Okay, so we are opening the public hearing for additional comments for the 5-year plan of the CBDG. And we have the experts here. And if there's any questions from anyone in the audience, now's the appropriate time to bring those forward.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I'm here to brief you yet again on the consolidated plan, which, as George mentioned, is basically the guiding document for the next 5 years' uses of CDBG resources, which equates to roughly $1 million, depending upon congressional appropriation, annual congressional appropriation. So what we have set forth in the plan, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, there's a full market analysis and needs assessment in the plan, is that we will be investing the CDBG resources much like we have in the past, and with a couple of small changes for this 5-year period that come about from the city of Prescott being designated as an exception community, which allows you to invest CDBG resources in neighborhoods or census block groups where 46.42% of the population is low and moderate income, where previously you were tied to the national standard of 51% of households being low and moderate income. And what that did for you is it opened up the other parts of the community beyond the Dexter neighborhood, including parts of the West Side and Gail Gardner neighborhoods, to also receive CDBG investment during the next 5 years. This is not to say those are the only areas where you can invest CDBG resources. Any area or any kind of eligible activity can take place, but special surveys have to be done to make sure that at least 51% of the people or households who will benefit are low and moderate income. The other way we invest CDBG resources, and we did a survey to kind of get an idea of what people thought was important, is what we call a direct benefit, and that's essentially something like Meals on Wheels or assistance, helping people with disabilities or people who are experiencing homelessness. So it's just kind of like a direct service to those folks. And what our survey said was seniors and people experiencing homelessness should be the top priorities.
Can we ask questions now, Mayor, or would you?
I'm wide open to questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just on the homelessness, is that to eliminate someone who is homeless and get them in a home, or would this also include some kind of emergency shelter for homelessness?
It would be both categories. So it would be support for shelters, existing shelters, operating support for them. It could also be for the prevention of homelessness, so like rental assistance for somebody who's maybe experiencing a temporary hardship, or utility or mortgage assistance likewise to prevent that from happening.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So what we ended up with were 4 priority needs, and these kind of follow the typical CDBG categories. The first being revitalization of neighborhoods, including public facilities and infrastructure, the public services and other economic opportunities, addressing homelessness, which is its own category, and providing decent, affordable housing. And this all comes out of the data analysis, the surveys that were done, and prior public meetings held by the Citizens Advisory Committee. And there are two categories, only two, of priority needs, high priority and low priority. And the way we classify those is high priority. It's something that it's highly likely we're going to fund it. In fact, we already know we are because it's in the first year action plan. And then there's low priority resources, which we say, you know what, we might have an opportunity to do this. It's important to the community, so we're going to include it. So what we ended up with were 7 activities in those 4 needs categories. So if we look at the revitalization, public facilities, and infrastructure, the way we separate those out are the kind of the traditional facilities and infrastructure projects. I don't have a cool video to show you with a hero at the end, but we, it's those kinds of things. It's the public works projects that take place in our neighborhoods, and then we also have the ability to do facilities and infrastructure in support of housing development, which is something you've done in the past to support Habitat for Humanity development. It could also be done to support rental development, which is identified as a high priority need. Public services and economic opportunities. We have services to meet basic needs, which I've described kind of in general, and that's a high priority. And based on a comment we received, we are in the public comment period right now, it was suggested that we add, should an opportunity arise, the ability to create or retain jobs. So we have added that as a new activity from the plan that went out for public comment. It will be in the final plan. We designated it a low priority because we don't really know what's going to come up, but we want it there. An example of that would be a business coming to you and saying, I need improvements to my storefront, because maybe it's not accessible, or it's a low traffic area and they want to attract more people, or I'm going to have to close and I'm going to lose, and I'm not going to, these people are going to lose their jobs, and they are, generally speaking, low and moderate income people, so it might be a retail establishment or, something along those lines. Addressing homelessness, one of the suggestions that we got was that we should have the ability to add new emergency and transitional housing beds should that opportunity arise. So that's included as a low priority. And then we have decent affordable housing, rehabilitating owner-occupied homes. So this includes things like disability accessibility improvements, ramps into and out of people's houses, emergency repairs like heating and cooling, so that people are basically safe and healthy. That is a high priority. It's something you funded consistently over the years. And then a direct assistance to first-time home buyers as a low priority should some opportunity arise to undertake that activity.
Excuse me, if an opportunity does arise, does that increase its priority?
It doesn't increase its priority. It's just at this point we don't, it's kind of an unknown if something like that, that opportunity might come up, but we want to leave it open for that. And it's something that our survey and, people who've had input have said, we think this is important.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you go back to the other slide when you start talking about
this one?
Yes, if there is 50 homes or say housing that needs to be refurbished in any way, I guess it would be to George or to yourself, does the city, acting as the agent for these funds, go out to bid for those repairs on all 50 houses, or do we there was a time here several years ago when we had the same plan and we ended up in major big-time difficulty with several contractors that were performing those deeds. So my question is do we go out and advertise for those contractors up front in the program so the same contractor is doing them all with a set price based upon the work performed?
We would unlikely do 50 homes at any one time. Simply scale and the amount of money that's available to us through the CDBG's annual allocations wouldn't let us do that. We bid almost everything out. It is dependent upon the city's procurement code as to what level of bid or quotes are required. So we follow our own purchasing process and bid process that the city's adopted. In most of those cases, what we're hoping to see and what we have seen in recent past is that we will get other subrecipients, someone who comes to us and says, I want to be able to contract out for work. So we hire an intermediary through the bid process, and they handle the detailed paperwork and the detailed contract work. We do monitor it, and we make sure that it follows all of those procurement processes.
Much like NACOG does.
Exactly the same process that NACOG follows.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know. Yeah, thank you.
So we are still in the public comment period, which closes this Sunday, May the 10th. I don't know if there are members of the public here who wish to comment on the plan. The other option is to send an email or a letter to George, who is the primary contact for the consolidated plan. And so we, as George said, we'll be back next week just to let you know if we've made any other changes. And our deadline is Friday the 15th. Okay. So,
is there any input from the public? Sure.
Hello, my name is Ruth Santo. I'm from Community Legal Services. As I'm sure you all know, 70% of the funds must be used for activities that benefit low and moderate income persons. That means that the funds must be used to eliminate slums, blight, and serious threats to health and safety. The CDBG funds must affirmatively further fair housing. That means the city must proactively work to overcome historic patterns of segregation, promote fair housing choice, and foster inclusive communities for all. We don't believe that paving giving $61,000 to pave a parking lot is a good use of the funds, and that satisfies the requirements of the CDBG funds.
I agree. Comment?
Just one comment. That particular issue is an annual action plan issue. That will be before you for discussion and action next week. So that is something that if you want to carry that comment over to next week, it's very appropriate.
If I may, I agree with you.
Daniel?
Yeah, I'd like to start up by when Steve was asking about how that would be handled. An example, and I know in this case I'm talking about that specific plan, but Habitat for Humanity Critical Home Repair Program, $40,000. So what the city does is gives a block of money to an organization that does the rehabilitation of homes, so that way the city doesn't have to micromanage it. And Habitat for Humanity, or for instance, it could be given to the CCJ's home repair program. And that way they just get a block to do what they already do, and therefore they administer it.
Let me ask a question, as long as you're going there, and I'm always curious about it. When you have like groups like the United Way, can they also ask for those types of monies and then match them with their monies to get a bigger bang for their buck?
Yes, if an organization applies for CDBG funds, one of the weighted criteria for recommending them for funding is that they're bringing some of their own monies or some of their own abilities with that application.
I
so
think that
matching makes it better.
Yeah, within a defined community that Daniel lives in or other folks, it would seem to me there would be an outreach to those folks that have the funds to be able to match to make the dollars go further to benefit more people in the community.
Right. These are both of the organizations I've mentioned have those programs in place. They sometimes will get funding from United Way, but this is an opportunity. They can apply for CDBG funds, and the funds can be given to these organizations who will then do the administrative effort as they usually do anyway. And a lot of their labor is actually volunteer labor. So they stretched out money quite a ways. But that was just to better explain what you were talking about. I found a couple errors in here that I wanted to point out. On page 40, where it talks about population, Prescott, it says Prescott is the most populated jurisdiction in the Quad City area. I think that needs to be corrected because I think we all know that Prescott Valley has passed us. So that's not an accurate statement anymore. And then when we come to the page 36, it mentions emergency shelters for adult individuals. Open Doors Winter Shelter has no longer been, I mean, it wasn't going this last year. What it has been changed to is Operation Deep Freeze. And here it gives a capacity of 32, and Operation Deep Freeze has a higher capacity than that. It would be 52?
Yeah, not that. Probably
40. Okay. He'd know. This is the new director of CCJ, by the way. And then it doesn't mention Yavapai Rescue Mission under the emergency shelters for mixed population. This one does women. And Prescott, you have Prescott Area Women's Shelter. I don't know if that's combining Prescott Area Shelter Services Family Center with the Women's Shelter. So this area needs a little bit of refining because it's not accurate reflecting the reality today. So I'm quite willing to contact Yavapai Rescue Mission and see if I can get their data in here. And I will talk with Prescott Area Shelter Services and see if this is an accurate reflection of the current state. But just, you know, I just started going over this a few days ago, having finished my work on the general plan other than advocating for it. And so this is some of what I've noticed. Thank you.
So how do you plan on using the information that we just received?
I would be happy if you would forward all your comments and your information. If you can forward it to George, you will get it to me, and I will incorporate it in there. It's not unusual. Thank you.
Okay. So those changes will reflect themselves in next week. Okay. Anything further?
Yeah, Mayor, just kind of reflect out a little bit on something Daniel was talking about. When we were closing in on last winter, Operation Deep Freeze kind of got into a real pinch. They didn't know if there was going to be any place to put people, and that's where when it's going to be 25 degrees or below or 2 inches plus of snow, the homeless have a place to go spend the night. And Salvation Army really stepped up this year, and it was very clear it was a temporary solution. And now that's kind of passed, but we're 6 or 7 months out from having our next crisis. I just wondered, is there anything in there that is going to help address the problem with Operation Deep Freeze? And I know Boys and Girls Club might be looking at making a move to Miller Valley. If that happens, is there any way to possibly bring a place for CCJ and the food bank work stuff they do and all the other stuff they do to possibly use part of that facility?
There's nothing specific in the annual action plan directed towards Operation Deep Freeze or their facilities. We have had contact with CCJ, the new director of CCJ, who may have a comment for you regarding that. We are working with them, and we certainly would continue to help them get a facility that operates and functions safely under our codes.
Even if it is for those, I mean, how many days a month was it this year that you guys had to open the doors?
Good evening. It's Paul Mitchell, and I am the new director of CCJ. We were open 27 nights this year as Operation Deep Freeze, and just to make sure that everybody understands, Deep Freeze was funded by community donations this last year. We don't know where our facility will be next year for sure. Salvation Army absolutely deserves great credit and laud for stepping up this last year, and we'll have to check and see if it will be available as well.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have occupants?
We had occupants, yeah. I think we had I want to give the right numbers. We have a final report coming out, and I will submit it to you all as reference, but I think it was 69 different individuals, and we probably averaged about 15 people a night. And we went from 4 at the beginning to 22 at the end. That kind of stuff.
So it served its purpose.
It absolutely served its purpose, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think the thing that shows that it served its purpose is we didn't read in the newspaper how anyone froze to death behind a Circle K. So
That's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And we did read about that, unfortunately, in Flagstaff this winter, that we lost an individual there. So anyway, we will continue to be in contact with you. I can guarantee you that.
Thanks for your help.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anything else? Let's close the public hearing, and we're adjourned.
Yeah, Mayor, before 6, you're a star.
Jim said he wanted